Welcome to Business at the Speed of Coffee, the one show about business, by business, for business. In this new series, we focus on policies and development in New Zealand. But before we get to the election, and of course it is the election here, the hot topic of the day around New Zealand is water. How much do we use? What do we pay for it? Where does it come from? And who owns it? The one person that knows a lot about this topic runs Watercare Services Auckland, Raveen Jadaram, and he's with me here in the studio today. Now Raveen, welcome to Business at the Speed of Coffee. Now you haven't always been in the water business. Where did life start for Raveen?
Well, I'm from Fiji, Kim, and I was born in Suva, but I grew up in a small sugar town called Lambasa.
So how did your journey develop to run one of the largest corporations in New Zealand?
Well, I did my university study in New Zealand because we didn't have engineering as a subject at the University of the South Pacific.
That lets me think that you might have been quite bright at school.
I was actually. I was ducks of school many times, and if I didn't come first, I had to be second.
So you were also competitive?
Extremely, yes.
And how did you get to university in New Zealand?
Well, I got a scholarship from the Fijian government, and I had a choice of either going to Australia or coming to New Zealand. And my father's older brother is a pharmacist here. Well, he's retired now, but he was here then. And I thought, well, New Zealand, Auckland, would be somewhere not as foreign for me because there was someone there that I knew.
Okay, so a little boy comes from Fiji into engineering school at Auckland.
Yeah.
That would have been pretty tough.
It was tough, but there were about 6 of us from Fiji doing engineering.
Okay.
I did civil engineering, and others were doing electrical, mechanical. And to apply for the scholarship, this is an interesting bit. The Fijian government would put a list of scholarships up, and number 1 was for civil engineers. So it was the toughest.
Ah, okay.
And doctors were 4th, and architects were 5th or something. So I said, I'll go for civil engineering. And when I finished engineering, I went back to Fiji and worked for the Fiji Housing
Was that part of
Authority.
the scholarship, having to go home and put something back in?
Yes, exactly. Work for the government or work in Fiji.
Okay.
And then, of course, so that was 1985, I started work. And then in 87, we had the coup.
Okay.
Yeah, and after the first coup in May, I left. I came to New Zealand, and then I got a job with Auckland City Council.
So now you got to work for the City Council. What sort of work do you do?
I worked in the drainage department. So
It's getting more exciting for the moment, Remy.
stormwater and sewage.
And this is actually really quite important for, I think, our viewers to understand, is we have a guy running the water business who started out his working life in the water business.
I did.
So you're not a Johnny-come-lately into this thing. So let's trace your journey through water, because right now we're dealing with some very complicated water problems. And that background will be informing the way you look at this. So after the City Council, we're in drainage.
Mm-hmm.
Where to from there?
Well, you know, as an engineer, engineers love building big things, designing big things. And I was a designer, and Auckland City Council did small stuff. The organisation that did big stuff used to be the Ministry of Works.
Oh, yes.
And as a student, I had worked for the Ministry of Works. So I was construction supervisor for the motorway between Queenstown Road and the Mangere Bridge. And that motorway stretch was built in 6 months. And I usually challenge others today and say, why does it take us so long to build motorways now?
If you've got an answer?
Well, I think there's too many obstacles. We're no longer a country that builds things. We're a country that stops from doing things.
It's not the engineering problems.
It's not an engineering problem.
It's other, we'll come to that in a second, of course. So you started building big things at the Ministry of Works.
So I left Auckland City Council, and joined the Auckland Regional Authority. So I ended up becoming the planning manager for water in 1995, and the Waikato River project was my project.
Okay, so you've been invested in this issue for a very long time. When you were doing that early work, when, you know, and I was here when it got very dry and we nearly went to hard stands in the street, did you see the genesis of the problem that we have now?
Well, yes. So we had the 93-94 drought.
And what were the planning issues in getting that first pipeline into the Waikato River?
Oh,
Were they essentially the same as they are today?
Quite challenging, because 1992 is when the Resource Management Act came into being. And so our project was one of the first to go through the RMA, a significant project to go through the Resource Management Act.
Was there a requirement for a government workaround, or did it just go straight through the system?
We went through the system, so there was no workaround. And we had numerous applications to make. So we had to apply to build the pipe in Manukau, because we had Manukau City Council, in Papakura, separate, had to get a consent, in the Waikato District, in Franklin, and then we had the Waikato Regional Council to deal with, and then the Auckland Regional Council to deal with.
Okay.
So we had a number of hearings.
Did you end up in the
and we ended up in the Environment Court.
And in a practical sense, for the amount of water that Auckland takes, we'll come back to the amount of water we use in a minute, the idea of storage and dams isn't a total solution. It might help, but isn't a total solution. So that leaves us with other sources. What about rainwater off the roof?
Absolutely. So rainwater off the roof is the least drought proof.
Okay.
But it is the simplest thing that you can do, because you put it in your own homes.
But right now there are practical impediments that in Auckland to do that, aren't there?
Yeah, so Auckland Council, so it's if you want to put a tank that is more than 1 metre high, you need a resource consent. There's certain requirements in the Auckland plan that the council has now identified that they need to remove them. It will take them a while. So in the meantime, the council is looking at removing the fees for applying for the consent. So initially there will be no consenting fees, and then if the council is able to change the Auckland plan, and there's a process, I'm not familiar with it, but there's a process that the council has to follow, and then they should make the installation of rainwater tanks easier.
But it's not going to be a requirement or anything like that anytime soon. And we don't really have a culture of rainwater storage, do we?
No. So I think there are some new subdivisions where rainwater tanks are required by the Building Act, or...
But that's to stop it from rushing too fast into the...
To the stormwater.
Yeah, stormwater.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, how much water are we wasting?
Wasting collectively?
Yeah. It's about half of what we collect, isn't it? I mean, it's a huge number.
No. So there are losses in our system.
Yeah.
So Watercare has got what we call real losses of about 13%. That's what we've agreed with.
And if I were to compare that 13% with other people supplying water around the world, how does that compare? I
would say it's actually quite good.
Oh, really? So other people lose water too?
Yeah, it sounds like a large sum. It is. In Europe, it's around 25%.
Oh, really?
In UK, in
old
London,
pipes.
Old pipes. So it's a function of age of pipes. Newer cities, Scandinavian cities that were damaged during the war, that built new infrastructure, Japanese cities like Tokyo, Singapore, it's around 6%.
And so even in a really good city, it's still going to be a reasonably high percentage.
You'll always have losses. So if we put Watercare's water mains, water pipes, end to end, it's over 9,000 kilometers long. Okay, it's so from here to Hong Kong, right? So when you have a large transmission line, there is going to be issues with joints, connections to people's properties, meter boxes, and So what happens is when the ground moves and it has been dry, so when you have dryness and wetness, the pipes settle and there are
cracks in them. Okay.
So over the last 2 years, because it's been very dry, we've had over 30% more breaks.
And they're hard to find, of course, aren't they? Yeah.
They're hard to find because Auckland is volcanic.
Yeah.
We have a lot of scoria in certain areas, Mount Eden, Ellerslie. It just goes down.
Yeah.
So there's no way to see where the water's leaking. Where there's vibrations, we also get leaks. So CBD, a lot of construction work.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and we've had a number of water main failures.
So you're telling me there is an opportunity for saving leak water, but isn't going to solve our problem? Okay.
We can't get it to zero.
No.
And it's not just water. Electricity lines also have losses. And they would be 8 to 12%.
So what about conservation? Now, we've never, I mean, I've lived in Auckland, apart from that period when we put the pipe into Waikato, you know, we spray our hose, nobody really thinks about it. Having lived in Australia, where basically you're on permanent allocation of water, you learn to wash your car with a bucket of water and so on. Wouldn't it make sense to promote water conservation anyway?
Absolutely. And that is something we're doing. We launched in February a website called waterforlife.org.nz, and we started our program on water is precious. It's a catch-22. We, by legislation, have to make sure that our costs of running our water business is as low as possible for long-term sustainability of the business. And water is important for life. So we're not profiteering from it. We're not paying any dividends to our shareholder. We reinvest all the money back into the infrastructure.
A utility in the true sense of
the true
sense. And
sense.
a social enterprise.
So it's so convenient, it's so easy to get, that construction companies would rather take our clean drinking water for construction activities or for suppressing dust, instead of saying we should be using non-potable water, rainwater, tank water, and even most of the homes, instead of saying I'm going to catch my rainwater and use that for gardening and for maybe washing my car, it's sometimes simpler, easier to just use the tap water.
Well, I mean, when we now get to the stage where we're facing the possibility of actually putting another pipeline into the Waikato, if for argument's sake, in the perfect world, you're able to convince Aucklanders actually, for the rest of your natural life, and as we grow, we are going to be conserving water, we're also going to eventually have most houses with some form of rainwater storage. If you did all those things, and you're going to save 5% of the waste or the leakage, would that obviate the need for this pipe, having done all those things, if you could?
Yeah. What you're saying is, could we not build more infrastructure going forward?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes and no.
Okay.
So I'll explain. So the challenge we've got with rainwater tanks is that when it's very dry, or when you're in a drought,
nobody's got
the tanks are empty. And people still need the water, especially those who have no other means. So those who use the rainwater for gardens but still have a connection with water care, they can still get the water from us. But there are lots of homes in the Auckland region who are not connected to the water care system. And over the last 2 summers, our water from the public supply was delivered to them by private tanker operators.
So they're buying the water from water care?
From water care. So as a result, this last summer, we had the highest peak of water demand. It was 560 megalitres a day. And it was over 500 megalitres a day almost every day during summer.
Okay.
So what that means is we still have to build our infrastructure for those times.
Okay.
Unless somehow we are able to suppress that demand, and that's the tricky bit.
Well, you could put the price up, of course.
You could put the price up. You could have a tariff structure that for summer has got a higher price.
Can you talk a little bit about the politics that sit under all this?
Yes, we can. I can talk about pricing.
Yeah.
So water in New Zealand is available for free. That's the position of government.
Yes.
And no one pays for water and neither do we. And we don't pay for water that we collect that rains and goes into our dams, or the water that we get from the Waikato River. So we don't pay for water. Our customers pay us for the water service we provide.
It's a distribution business.
So it's the cost of collecting, treating, storing, and distributing the water.
And
That's
actually
what
getting rid of it.
and getting rid of it.
Yeah.
So that's the wastewater side of the charge.
So it seems to me, from all the things we can talk about, conservation and everything else, the one place it probably makes the most sense, still, is pumping water out of the Waikato River.
Yes.
Can we talk about that water resource? And I know that people in Waikato say, hey, this is an Auckland problem. It's not our problem. But can you put it into perspective for us? What's going on down there?
Okay, well, Auckland is a coastal city, so we're not a city next to a river. So we don't have sufficient fresh water. So we've got some groundwater. Yes, it rains all the time. And we've got dams, and we can't build anymore because there aren't that many valleys. And we need to diversify, we have to diversify our sources. So the rainwater, we're in a drought, all our dams haven't filled up. They won't fill up if we build more dams. It's like having more containers with the same amount of food.
Yeah.
So we, after the 93-94 drought, decided we'll go to another catchment, which is the Waikato River. It's a large, mighty Waikato. And we are getting 150 megalitres a day from there. To keep up with Auckland's growth, we identified in 2013, out of about 90 options, that the Waikato River was the best solution for Auckland as the next source. And that's taking into account the cost, the impacts on the environment, and we made the application to the Waikato Regional Council for another 200 megalitres a day. Now, where we're taking the water out of in Tuakau is one of the last potable water takes before it gets to the sea.
So by the time it gets to our intake, everybody else has had a go at it.
Yeah, they've had a go, they've taken the water, they've discharged their wastewater, and it gets to Tuakau, and then we're the last take for potable purposes.
How much water at that point is going past Tuakau?
Yeah, so it's over 16 billion litres of water every day.
16 billion litres of water a day are going past there.
Yeah.
And we're currently taking 150.
We're taking 150 and we want to take another 200. So collectively, 2%.
You mean only 2%?
Only 2%.
Okay, but what does it look like? I mean, will they notice it?
So at that point, the river is flowing at about 6 meters deep.
Yes.
The tidal influence lifts the river, changes the level by up to 500 millimeters, half a meter. So what we are taking and propose to take compared to the impacts of the tide is insignificant.
So you've got to say it's negligible, but there are people who have a view. Now let's talk about the views that some people have about this. Who are the protagonists in this discussion?
Well, from a science point of view, we are able to demonstrate that the impacts of us taking the water is insignificant.
Okay, so technically we can park the environmental issues.
Environmental issues. There may be a few who would still be concerned, but we can address that. The bigger challenge is the position that Waikato Tainui have on the river. For them, the river isn't a thing, it's a being. So they have cultural affiliations with the river.
But would they then therefore not have the same objection to the people of Hamilton using the water, for argument's sake?
They would. I think
or Cambridge, or for that matter, anywhere living on the river.
For everybody. I think the bit we agree with Waikato Tainui, and there's a Crown agency called the Waikato River Authority, is that we would like the river to be cleaner. We would like to restore the health.
But that's got to do with farm runoff and all sorts of other things, doesn't it?
Everything.
Yeah.
Because if Aucklanders are taking that
We
water,
want
we want clean water. And so we can join forces and say, look, if 1.5 million people in Auckland are drinking that water, the river will get cleaned up because it is in our interest. And we're an informed organization, quite a significant organization with clout to make submissions for the discharges on the river upstream.
Okay.
And we have done that in the past.
So, Ravine, 100 million litres, I mean, I've heard people panicking about this. Can you put that into perspective? What does it actually mean in terms of overall enterprise?
Well, you know, from a water supply point of view, nothing. It's just another
drop
number.
in the ocean.
It's a drop in the ocean, yes. However, you know, it's got lots of zeros. So to the common person, it's like, that must be a lot of water. But as I've said earlier, at Waikato, on the Waikato River, where we want to take our 150 to 350 million litres of water a day, billions of litres of water flowing. So, yes, as a number, it sounds like a big number with lots of zeros, but it's not a big number when we start talking about water supply and we start talking about serving 1.5 million people.
What do you put down the outrage that we see when in the New Zealand Herald about all this?
Well, you know, reporters and journalists, one thing that they need to do more of, put in context.
Yeah.
If they put the context, then it makes sense. So if I said to you, you're drinking too much water, and then you say it's only 8 glasses a day, then I would say, oh, that's not much. Or as people are saying, Aucklanders use too much water. And then we remind the rest of New Zealand that Aucklanders are very efficient water users. They only use 157 litres per person per day on average. And that's not much.
Compared to elsewhere where they're more.
Yeah. Other parts of New Zealand, they use 250, 300 litres.
Really?
Yes. So and it's partially to do with the fact that there is a very transparent user pays, you know, volumetric water service charge, while in other places it's just a rate.
Oh, of course. Well, I think there is a publicity communications issue here, because we do need to hear the voices about the stewardship. I think most people get that. But I don't think we should allow it to go on forever, because Auckland, you know, is got an issue here. Which brings me to wastewater, because I know right now you're digging tunnels under Auckland. I think it's $1 billion, is that right?
It will be about $1 billion.
It's a huge project. A lot of people in Auckland are probably not aware of it, but we're digging this huge tunnel under, well, it's basically going under the city, isn't it? Under
the city, yeah. From our Mangere wastewater treatment plant, it's going to come down to Western Springs and all the way through Grey Lynn. 15 kilometres. And
tell our viewers what you actually do with this wastewater, because I don't think they realise how much you do with it.
Yeah, so we collect Auckland's wastewater, that's the sewage, at Mangere, which is our largest treatment facility, and at Rosedale, North Shore. And we've got other smaller treatment plants. At Mangere, we treat the wastewater, disinfect it. We have UV, killing any bacteria after treatment before we discharge into the Manukau Harbour. We are using the methane from the treatment process, because the way we treat the process, the wastewater, is a biological process. So we use bacteria to eat the sewage. And when they eat that, we get methane. And we are using the methane to generate electricity.
Does that produce enough electricity to run all the pumps there?
The treatment plant currently, between Rosedale and Mangere, we are producing 60% of the electricity we need. We've set ourselves a target to generate 100% of the electricity by 2025.
Really? So, and by the way, if I'm running a waste grinder in my kitchen, is that good for your machinery out there or bad?
Yeah, it's good. So those bugs need the food.
Okay.
So when you're using your waste disposal unit, then all that goes down, and that's food for the bugs.
So that's better than putting it in the landfill, because you're actually making power out of it.
Absolutely. In fact, when Auckland shuts down after Christmas, our treatment plant struggles because
They've got enough
there's
bugs.
not enough food for the bugs.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to go one little ticklish subject here. Around the world, most places, the big cities, are using the wastewater from the sewage and actually turning it into useful water. Let's park the yuck factor for a second.
Yep.
How hard would it be for you to take the water that's coming out of your plant now and make it so I can drink it?
Okay, so we're doing a pilot right now
Really?
at Mangri. So we are using some of the treated water from Mangri wastewater treatment plant at Mangri as part of the industrial process. So we're
really?
already using some of it where it's not being drunk.
No.
The central interceptor tunnel that is going from Mangri wastewater treatment plant all the way to Grey Lynn will need water. And we don't want to use clean drinking water. So we are putting a pilot treatment plant that will take the treated wastewater from Mangri, treat it again to potable standards, but it won't be used for drinking. It will be used for the tunneling operation.
Okay, so there's an example.
As an example, because we want to demonstrate to ourselves and also the health authorities, because New Zealand doesn't have the legislation that allows purified recycled wastewater.
Which is ridiculous. I mean, you have to say that that's everywhere in the world are using it. So there's a body of work that needs to be done.
There's a body of work that needs to be done, yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, it all sounds a kind of a good news story. So you need some help to get this pipe built, I guess?
The central interceptor?
Yeah, no, the water from the Waikato.
Well, at the moment, we just need the raw material. Because our process is like any manufacturing process. You need the raw material, then you need warehouses to store it. We have our dams, that's where we store it. Then you have the factories, our treatment plants. Then after you've made the raw materials, you have warehousing, and we have our service reservoirs, and then you have a distribution channel to the consumer. So right now, our challenge is the raw material. We need the water. And once we have the water, we will build the infrastructure. That's not a problem.
So, Ravine, what's in for Ravine the next 5 years? Is that how long it's going to take us to get the Auckland feeling resilient with its water?
I think we need to have some conversations with our business communities and our customers and with our shareholder, Auckland Council. Because this drought has resulted in us having restrictions. And Aucklanders haven't had restrictions since 93, 94. And the reaction has been one as if we've had a crisis. You know, businesses, it seems, don't want to have restrictions. So the question is, should we have restrictions for businesses in a city like Auckland? What's the impact? What's the economic impact? And if we do have restrictions, how frequent should they be?
Well, the 100% resilient story means they're going to pay more. It's simple as that.
Absolutely. And that's the conversation we need to have. If we say you could have higher resilience if you paid 10% more or 20% more or 100% more, what is it?
Well, Ravine, that's a piece of work we will have to do. And we are coming to the end of our program. Maybe the next time we speak, we'll have found the solution to that particular problem. So thank you for being on The Business at the Speed of Coffee, and thank you, our listeners, for being with us today.